All right, let's go. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll jump in first with just some kind of about the Alpha group. I wanted to ask real quick. I know you sent out that notice about the Alpha group that the next phase is starting, early next year, and that's the phase where you want us to be able to try to, have some people that we are beginning to mentor. Now, is that something that if we do that, we can begin to use the material from the first phase and actually share the videos, or at least be showing them to people, and the resources?
Yeah. Yeah. I've actually just sent out an email to the Alpha group with all the groups. So all the different small groups. There's 2 in the Georgia area and 1 in Florida, and there's 20 altogether. So the schedules for meeting there, that should just have gone out now. So that's got a spreadsheet in there with all the different people who are in the different groups.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is have an opportunity to meet with each group in January, so that each group can touch base with me, and anything they want to ask, we can look at and deal with there. For those who can make it, I'll record them for each individual group, so that each group will be able to look at that if they can't make it, or ask questions before, so I can answer them on air. And once that's done, it's really seeing then, I said we'd have a 6-month trial really to see who then would want to continue and register for that. And then once people have registered, they can continue the process at their own pace. So some people are still working through the first module, or still working through the second, so that it becomes something more of a lifestyle rather than just teaching that they listen to. There'll be sort of like an assessment to see where people are at, and then those that are ready, I'd encourage them to recruit others and begin to mentor them themselves. Even you only have to be a couple of steps ahead, but you'll have your own testimonies of working through the material and how it's worked for you. And with that beta group, then they will then register with each person as their sponsor or whoever it is, and form groups or one-to-ones or whichever ways. There's no pressure to have to do that. Ideally, ultimately, this is being designed so it will be a mentoring tool for others. So but there's no pressure to when someone chooses to do that, or if they think, well, I haven't got anybody. I mean, I have a whole load of people lined up. I mean, there's loads of people who keep asking me, can they join the Alpha group? And I'm saying, eventually when I got tough and said no, I have a list of people who want to be mentored by others. So for some who can't find anyone, I can always point them in the direction of those who are looking for someone to just help them. So then that group, the beta group, then they can use the material from then on, just like the Alpha group. There'll be a process for them to register, and it won't be as much detail as needed as things, because essentially you just vouch for by the people who are wanting to help them. And then that can be local people, that could be people who are meeting online. It's however it works really. And the idea is to get as many people ultimately to be part of a Joshua generation, so we can be ready for what's coming and be ready to move on. So that's really the process, and the first step will be to see, okay, what group am I in, and when is my group meeting. Obviously trying to fit in -8 to +10 time zones has been quite a logistical exercise, let's say. So I've tried to put people in regional groups. So there's a group in Texas, there's a group in California, Washington, Oregon, 2 in Georgia, 1 in Florida, and then the rest of them are in East Coast, sort of East time zone, Central time zone, and there's 1 Mountain Time group, and then a Canadian group, plus 2 UK, 2 Germany, and 1 Far East Australasia. So it's quite thing. So I'm having to sort of juggle my schedule and move things around so I can fit these things in. Not everyone will be able to make it because, in a sense, I am aware that for those on over in the minus time zones, for me to get to them, it's sort of usually mornings. But for those who can, and those who can't, that's great. They'll be recorded. So that's really where it is. And now we're going to go from there. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Then
Okay.
I'll wait to look at all of that and go from there.
Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. Excellent. All right.
Well, if either of you guys got a burning question, go ahead. Otherwise, I've got some other stuff.
I did want to ask one thing real quick. Mike, you were talking when we ended our session last Thursday. I think you were showing these diagrams that people were trying to show this wheel within a wheel, this cube, this whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting because as you were trying to show those diagrams, I go back to one of Ian's teaching when he was talking about the Melchizedek and being in the fourth dimension.
Yeah.
You would move from a three-dimensional person to a fourth-dimensional person. He talked about the cube that you would do that. But the most interesting thing was after you showed us that, I went to prayer on Tuesday, and as we were in intercessory prayer, all of a sudden one of the ladies in the prayer group started seeing this. And this isn't a lady that's basically engaged with some of the things that we're doing. I mean, she's just not engaged with this. But the aspect that she brought is she was trying to do the same thing everybody else was, trying to draw what she saw. And she had this piece of paper, and I explained to her, Mike had kind of showed that to us that morning. But the thing that she thought was, what she was caught up in, was actual movement of the throne. Where you were actually moving within the throne, and the throne became mobile as you were in this whatever this object is, however we describe it. So I thought that was an interesting perspective, that she thought that was, the movement of the throne. So I just thought you might comment on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it in a sense, our own thrones are mobile, and they can move in and around, the dimensions. I tend to engage myself by just thinking about where I need to go, and then just moving into that dimension and going where I need to go. But I have, my wife, she basically's got a chariot, and she just, wherever she goes, places in a chariot, because it's like her throne is like a chariot, and it moves her around. No, she didn't have any idea of that to start with. It was like, I haven't got a throne, and it's like, well, what are you? Where are you then? Well, I'm in this chariot. I said, well, why don't you see that? That is the throne that you've got, and you can engage in places and dimensions as a result of it. And so this sort of whole thing, which is, I mean, some call it sacred geometry, and it's this sort of interactions of, I think, connections between, the spheres of heavenly realms, and where the ancient paths meet, and all this stuff. I mean, I think it's governmental spheres, but there is definite movement within, and it isn't static, that. And I mean, it's hard enough to see it in a two-dimensional, three-dimensional type picture, let alone trying to sort of draw it and get it moving and shifting, and we're shifting within it. And I mean, it's sort of one of those things. It's like, whoa, that's quite a thing. But when you experience it, it feels like that. I mean, when I was in the blue cube, in the sapphire cube, I was getting these facets and light facets, and almost like, where you're looking into a diamond, but you're inside the diamond, and everything's moving around you. I mean, it was just like these sort of spheres of revelation, and we're just moving, and I was in the middle of it, just like, it was weird. But everything is to start with, until you begin to engage and then find out, okay, well, why is this revelation being released? What's the purpose of it? I think once we're looking to begin to engage in the governmental perspectives of creation and the order of creation and how we bring alignment of that and all the blueprints and stuff that come out of that, there's a whole load of things within this sapphire cube, and particularly the sapphire pavement before the throne of God, and that is very, very full of movement. I mean, it's a dimensional thing. I mean, it's so hard to describe, isn't it? Because we in this realm we can't do that. I mean, we can see into it, and I mean, I guess some people are starting to move. I mean, I was talking to a lady yesterday who was in the supermarket a few times, and she got quite annoyed because people kept walking right in front of her and standing in front of where she was looking in the thing, and then she realized they couldn't see her. I mean, she'd been spending so much time engaging in the kingdom, and I think someone, Millie Bennett, is one of the ladies who's connected with Ian and Justin Abraham, who was transparent in front of her boss and freaked him right out, So some of this stuff's happening, and she was like, she didn't understand and she tapped someone on the shoulder, and they freaked right out because it was like where did you come from, And she was there all the time, but she was in and out of phase. So I guess there's this. We're learning to do some of the things that Jesus did. He was able to walk through people, and he was able to disappear, and he was able to have control over the frequency and the vibration of things to effect transformation. So he changed water into wine. Well, how did he do that? Well, he was able to actually affect the molecular frequency of what it was and change it. He was able to walk on water. He was able to do that by doing the same thing, effectively controlling the vibrational frequency of the water so it became solid to his feet, and lots of other things like that, which are, I think, some of what these things are beginning to unveil. There's revelation in understanding how the dimensions and how the spheres work together, and some of this stuff is where it's starting to come out. So when someone sees that and hasn't got a background in it, that God is really starting to draw people, and it's a drawing to a deeper revelation and understanding of the realms of heaven and their governmental understanding of it, and the 12 houses and a function. I mean, I've been pursuing this for a while now, and I know it's very much connected with the 12 chancellors' houses, and various things to do with that and how they function in 3s and 4s. And a lot of it is about faces of 3 and faces of 4 within these spheres. So you get these geometrical shapes which are dimensional, but they operate in 3s and 4s, and you suddenly, when I'm looking into them, I can suddenly see things that before they were just like, I don't understand this. But the more I'm looking and the more I'm engaging, the more it's making a little bit more sense. Not enough sense that I've got, enough to be able to teach on it, but enough to be able to, I'm on the way of finding out and discovering some things, and pursuing it, I know Sunday here I'm going to be teaching on the different interactions between the angels and the 4 faces of God, how they manifest here and how their connection produces an arc for openings and engagement and stuff that manifests here, and then stuff that people can engage in heaven. So I've got a whole series of diagrams and colors and where the 4 faces of God engage with these 4 faces, and actually that is a square or a diamond shape superimposed over another diamond shape. And that actually, when I looked at it, I think, oh, that is something I recognize. But we're actually experiencing it most weeks, where with using flags and represent the 4 faces and represent the different angels, and the 7 spirits of God, people are beginning to connect. So I felt it was time I needed to explain it, which meant I needed to understand it first, which was like, what is going on here? So I spent some time stepping in myself to some of the areas where, for instance, the eagle and winds and sound of many waters came together, and it was just like, wow, it took me to a place I'd never been. And began to reveal and unveil some things pretty powerfully. So we're going to have some fun on Sunday, and to do that, because we've shifted all our chairs back even further than they were, because we tend to operate in a semicircle, but it wasn't enough room So for all these things to be set out, so we've now shifted a whole rows of chairs right back, so we've got even more room to engage it. So that'll be fun. So yeah, very interesting though. Yeah.
It was so interesting to see somebody like you say start talking about it that really didn't have a grid for it any more than we did, but it's obvious that God is really trying to make that evident to us, or really trying to open that area up to us, and we just need to try to figure out how we embrace it, how we move in it, what the purpose of it is, and how we move through the kingdom with it, because it's pretty exciting just to think about.
Oh, it is, yeah. I mean, there's another lady I was talking to on Monday in one of the groups, and she basically, we did an encounter, and she basically said, as she was breathing out the breath of God, this whole thing about the breath of God and how God breathed it into us, and we speak it out or breathe it out to bring creative order and stuff, she could actually see these patterns coming out of her mouth as she spoke and as she breathed out in the spirit. So, okay, yeah, there's a whole other aspect there I'm going to have to look to engage in, but really good stuff. I mean, for a lot of people, it's like really weird, but hey, there's a whole lot of weird stuff in the Bible, isn't it? You read Ezekiel, and if you read that with the eyes of what on earth was going on there, it's pretty weird. Wheels within wheels, and the different thrones and all those sorts of things. It's just now, hey, we get to access it, whereas before it was just a story. Now it's becoming unveiled and accessible. Now we have to really figure out what it really meant, rather than how they were trying to describe it using the language that they had. I mean, how do you describe some sort of technology when you've got no technology as a reference point? It's very, very hard, isn't it? So some of the descriptions were as good as they could do, but now we get to go and see into a greater depth and have a greater understanding of it, which is very, very interesting, I find. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else? Yeah. Cool.
Joe, you got anything?
Of course, but you go ahead. You got two things lined up. Go.
All right, well, shifting gears just a little bit, I wanted to ask a question about the courts. How do you see the difference between, you had a real good session, I think it was on Monday I listened to, where you talked about the courts and some practical court cases you guys had done recently with healing. And it was a little different protocol than what we've been doing, and I guess my question is, how do you see the difference between being like the widow woman that went and knocked on the door of the unjust judge, just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming in order to get an answer, versus the way we go into the courts and get an answer, but then maybe it doesn't happen yet, so we have to take it back in. I mean, do you see that we need to keep hitting it, keep hammering it, and until I think I heard, it might have been Ian or maybe it was Grant Mahoney that talked about for a whole year they had to go into the court to get something broken loose of something they were trying to do, and it took just repeatedly coming back and presenting the same case. So how do you see the difference between those two, or how would you address that?
Yeah, well, I think some of it depends on the wideness of the sphere that you're looking to engage in. If you're looking to engage in something that you have authority over directly, like your own life, your own mountains, then you're not dependent on any other outside in sort of things that you have to interact with. You can interact with your own life. Yes, you can look at whether there's legal rights and things there that you have to deal with, but you know that if you deal with them, they're dealt with, and you know that if you go back and you give the enemy access again, that you'll certainly have to go and repent of that and deal with it again. And so when it's dealing with your own life and you're dealing with the issues that you want to be separated from, or you want to see breakthroughs in say your kingdom spheres, then I think you can go in, and once you deal with what you need to deal with, then you have the mandate to outwork it. And it's the outworking that you've got to keep at. You know, you don't necessarily have to keep going back and getting another mandate unless God shows you that there are deeper levels of things that you have to deal with. But if you've dealt with everything you need to deal with, then you have to then administrate that mandate in the face of opposition, usually from the enemy. And that's where the issues come in. I have a mandate and a legal court order to enforce some sort of situation, but that doesn't mean the enemy is going to just lie down and give up, because he may well test your resolve. Do you believe what the mandate you've got, or actually is it just something that you're playing with? And so, you know, you get, let's say you have a mandate court order in this realm that says someone can't go within 100 yards of you or whatever, and they do. Just because you have an order, it doesn't chain them up. It just means that they have an order that they have been issued with. If they choose to try and break that order, then you have to know what to do. And this is where a lot of people fall down, because they immediately think, oh, it didn't work. You know, I thought it was just going to be simple then. Well, we're in a battle. It's a war. Our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's against those spiritual forces. And so if one of those familiar spirits oversteps his bounds again and tries to bring a thought pattern or a behavior pattern onto you, then you have to take that captive. That's the key. Take the thought captive and then take it back to the court. You don't have to go back and do the original case unless you've given into that familiar and gone down the route yourself where you therefore need to repent. If you've recognized where it's coming from, but recognize, hey, this has got no authority over me, and this is looking to exercise authority, then you then take it back in the court. And if it's broken that court order, then God's judgment can be released on it. You know, because God judges the enemy, and he releases that judgment. Now, we can see that in the story of the Legion and the Deliverance. They talked to Jesus and said, well, don't send us there. So there were places that they were dispatched to, and there are obviously different places that they could have been dispatched to, depending on the level of, you know, the judicial decision that was made. You know, and if you break a court order and you get taken back to court, you have the displeasure of the judge, who may hold you in contempt of court, and that actually can put you in prison. You know, usually not for that long, but actually as a sign, hey, I'm serious. If you do this again, look out. I've found in my own life that those familiar spirits do not like that, and they stop, you know, pretty quick. But if they can convince you or deceive you into thinking, hey, it didn't work, I've still got authority here, I can still take you down this pathway, and you fall for that, then you need to deal with it again, because you've given legal right again. So if there's a legal right, you have to deal with it. If you're talking about a wider sphere of government, there may be more things than you can just do, because there may be other things, other factors involved. And, you know, I think we've talked about it before. You know, as God has a bench of three, the enemy also has a bench of three, and there's an agreement between what goes on in the realm of the kingdom of God in terms of dragons, giants, whatever you call them there, principalities and powers in the atmosphere of the earth, and what goes on in the earth. And so if you're trying to deal with a cultural issue, it's not as simple as just going to the court once and trying to deal with that issue, because there may be multiple layers of why the enemy has access going back generations. And I would say some of those things require multiple cases because they're complicated. You know, the history of a city or an area or a nation has multiple things that contribute to the fact of the culture and the atmosphere that the enemy rules in. So we have to remove the legal rights. Say blood is crying out from the ground or whatever, from things that have been done, history, various covenants made with the enemy, various things like that. We have to deal with those things as we get in revelation of them. We then have to make sure that what that is authorized in the realms of heaven in terms of giants, dragons over regions, areas, are dealt with, and then we need to deal with the atmosphere of the earth with the angelic realm and dispatch the angels to deal with the atmosphere. And so you're in a process of looking to deal with and break the cycles that give one the power over the other. And sometimes that can be difficult when you're in a culture that actually is continually feeding into and operating in. So that can make it more difficult. But I think some of that going forward goes beyond the capacity of the mobile court. And you then need to access the legislative courts to get legislation which deals with those things from heaven. Because there then sometimes needs to be legislation made from heaven to enforce that on the earth. And that's a different dimension of authority. And not everyone can operate in that right now. So there's other levels of kingdom authority that we'll learn how to do. And ultimately, the Galactic Council, they sit, I think, in February the 24th, and they go in periods of 70, dealing with judgments, dealing with justice, dealing with grace, and essentially then they are not fully functioning, because our generation is not taking its place on that council, because it's just learning how to do the mobile court mostly. So to operate in that level, you need to understand legislative things, and you need to understand some of these cubes and stuff. I mean, because that's some of the dimensions of the blueprints that you have to understand how to administer. And that's coming though. These are the shifts that are taking place, these opening of the houses in heaven. It's all coming to bring alignment, and ultimately way beyond what we see just on the earth, into the whole of the created order. But we have to take our place, and Ian's view, which is interesting, is that there are many who are assigned to those roles and have that capacity, but have never ever engaged there. So they've never been there. They have a call, but they've never exercised the call fully. And so they're operating in this realm mostly with quite high levels of authority, but not taking their place to administer in the way that they should. And he feels that some of that is the old order, and those people are falling away for new people to take their places. Because the gift and calls of God were without revoke. So when God has called people, while they're still there, either they're going to answer that call or they're going to die, basically. And when they die, that call can be passed on to others. So his view, and I heard him the other day say, he feels in the next 10 years there's going to be a lot of people of that generation, of that old order, who are going to die, and more of the new order are going to take their place, because they can access those realms and they can begin to administer the kingdom from there with a greater understanding of authority and their identity in royal priesthood, as kings and priests. So there's a whole lot of stuff there which we're going to have to come into. So keep at it, but keep administering it from here, what you've received there. That's the key. And just keep seeking for the revelation that will be, are there more accusations? I'm going to deal with those accusations. It's the same with lie busting, same sort of thing. Okay, God, show me where this area, what are the lies that are operating that gives the enemy authority in my life or someone else's life. It's just, okay, what are the lies operating in our community? What are the lies operating in our city? What are the lies that the deception of the enemy is causing people to believe? And the biggest ones, of course, are the religious ones. It's the religious spirits that keep most people in the most bondage, because they think that those things are from God, and that is a huge issue. So that's why, you know, the judgment of God is coming to the church to actually show this is the revelation of who I am and what I'm doing, and this isn't. There's no punishment associated with that. There's just revelation coming to give people a clear choice. Where do they want to be, in the wilderness or in the promised land? And are they going to cross over, even though that can be difficult, but are they going to cross over and embrace their full inheritance, rather than operating in the whole Moses generation that's been before? You know, so a lot of that is again part of this coming into a new order of authority. You know, the order of Melchizedek has to operate beyond the veil because it's not an earthly priesthood. You know, it's not after the order of the Levites or after the Aaron's order. It is after the order of Melchizedek, where Jesus is the high priest in heaven, and he has gone before, it says in Hebrews 6, as a forerunner in that order, so that we can go afterwards and embrace that dimension of priestly and kingly function, you know, beyond the veil. And that is going to be the, I guess, the acid test. Are people operating beyond the veil? If they're not, then there won't be heavenly blueprints and there won't be shadows on the earth for those things to be manifested, because it will only be those things that they've tried to get from heaven from being here, and those things are no longer going to be occupied by God. You know, the glory is going to depart, and it's going to embrace fully that which God recognizes as a heavenly pattern of government on earth. So there's a lot of stuff coming with this order of maturity. You know, we have to go from friends to lords, and we can't stay at lordship. Most of the activity of the mobile court is lordship, of looking to bring the principles of the kingdom into play. Once you then engage in kingship, you have to go and engage the other judicial systems and protocols of heaven to bring legislation and begin to outwork that legislation, and ultimately have charge of the courts. That's what Zechariah 3, 6, and 7 talks about. You know, having charge of the house, which initially my life is a house, so I need charge of my house, but the wider household of God, and having charge of the courts. Ultimately, so we can stand in the presence of the assembly of God, you know, which is in higher realms and higher levels of courts. You know, and there are the court of judges and things like that. You know, that's the only court I don't think I've actually not yet been in. You know, but there are, well, of those that I know about, I'm sure there's loads of others that I've got no idea about yet, but those that I know about, I've not been in that one. But, you know, I'm functioning in some of the others, and more people are going to be raised up into the capacity of operating in chancellors, that sphere of government, to release other people into their government, you know, and to support that and to administer it, you know. So, you know, we're on a pretty steep learning curve with this stuff, I feel, and you know, we're getting revelation released thick and fast, really, and not everyone gets all of it. So you have to be fairly eclectic to look at what is being picked up from people in different places, so that we can embrace it. You know.
Thank you, Mike. That was good.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
Well, interestingly enough, the question I had lined up falls right behind that one, I think. So this whole process so far for me, you know, gateways, courts, cleansing the soul, you know, the path of holiness, developing the relationship with the King, and then, you know, walking out your responsibility in His kingdom.
Yeah.
So kind of getting cleaned up, you know, get in charge of your own house,
yeah,
if you will. Where's the, being new to this, and you know, just even this whole pathway, if you will, where's the place of like deliverance or deliverance ministry? In other words, Moses needed his help, you know, needed help holding his arms up. David had some giants that he couldn't kill alone.
Yeah.
Needed help, and you know, I guess on two ends of the spectrum, I go to somebody to deliver me, like people did to Jesus. It's an easy button. as Bill Johnson calls it, the Jesus one-step program, right? And then this, largely where we're taking ourselves, and it's a living sacrifice, and it's a process, and it's the courts, and it's gateways, and you go back to the courts, and et cetera. But where's the place for that now?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I mean, within the whole transformation series that I did, which sort of follows this process through, there's plenty of room for help. I mean, I got some ministry the other night because there were some things that I needed some. I'd gone as far as I did. I prepared everything, but sometimes you need people to minister healing to you. You need someone to lay hands on you and to bring that frequency into your life. And again, it's a part of being humble. It's not that I don't understand it, but actually sometimes God just wants me to humble myself and say, look, I need help. Can you help me? And I got some ministry on Monday night, and it was quite a humbling experience because my wife had to do it. I went with our bench of 3 and my wife, 4 of us, to deal with some stuff, and the others, they actually, you need to minister to your wife, and you need to let her minister to you. And I said, yeah, but I've come for you to minister to me. So I know, but God's told us that you need to humble yourself. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, and to start with, it was just like, oh, flip, this is really hard. But actually, God really worked into it, and it was a breakthrough into some stuff, and now we got something that we can pursue and continue. So there are some times where you do need somebody to speak into things. Like lie busting is a ministry where other people help. They help you to be able to just follow a process. We have a group that is going through the transformation series, and someone is helping those through it with the steps along the way, and there's ministry as part of that. We have a ministry team that is equipped in these things. They're equipped in lie busting, they're equipped in deliverance in other ways, in lots of different ministry that we picked up over the years that offers ministry to people. And so we're not, I'm not saying that coming to maturity you need less and less of that. I think you do, but it doesn't mean that you don't need it sometimes. And therefore I'm totally open for that. It's no problem in dealing with it. I just think we've probably got more understanding of how to deal with the legal rights the enemy had, because I can remember, I did a lot of deliverance ministry, a lot, like from 20 odd years ago. I sort of, my first deliverance ministry was the most hilarious thing you'd ever think. It's like, never seen it before, was in a Sunday morning praying for a friend of mine, and all of a sudden he started slithering like a snake on the floor, and I'm like totally freaked out, like I'd never seen anything like that before. What am I supposed to do? And it's just like, flip, let's wake him up quick, because we didn't know what to do with it. So it was like, okay, something just happened. Were you aware of what happened? No. Well, this is what you were doing. Oh, was I? Yeah. So what are we going to do? Well, can you help me? So I'm like, yeah, okay. The words came out of my mouth before I'd thought about could I help the guy or not. It was just like, yeah, all right, okay, tonight we'll come around your place. And so I recruited 2 others who were equally as inept as I was, and we came to this guy's house. Basically, we went to his house 7 o'clock in the evening, Sunday evening, came round to him, started praying for him. There he goes, manifesting on the floor, slithering around, and we're like, okay, now what did Jesus do? It's right. Okay, come out. So we had a go at that, for best part of 40 minutes, sort of like, getting louder and louder, screaming at this thing to come out. It wasn't having any of it. So then it was like, one of them had the bright idea of, didn't Smith Wigglesworth punch someone to deliver them? So I thought, oh, hang on a minute, let's hold back on that one for a while. And so we were like, one of us was praying in tongues, while the other 2 were sort of trying to beat this thing to death, really. And so we went at it, and eventually it was like after about an hour and a half, 2 hours, it was like one of us had the bright idea, didn't Jesus ask what the name was? So then it was like, okay, what's your name? You know, so we went at this thing for another 20 minutes until I think at that time we just exhausted it, you know, and it basically told us its name, you know, and its name was stubbornness. So it was like, you know, and so we said to this guy, who I know quite well, do you think this applies to you? Yeah, yeah. So do you think you can repent and renounce being stubborn and being independent and doing things your own way? Yeah. Okay. So he did, and basically we just cast the thing out. And then we thought, yeah, well, we were jumping in the air, having sort of gone at this thing for 2.5, 3 hours. We were leaping in the air like, yay, this thing's gone. So we thought, oh, we're just going to pray blessing on him. Started praying for him, and he starts manifesting something else. But then when we had it was like, okay, who are you? And actually, in the next half an hour, we got rid of 3 or 4 other things. Wow. But it was just like, it was hilarious. I mean, you know, we had no idea really, but with a little bit of biblical knowledge, which sometimes can be quite dangerous, I guess, you know, we just went at this thing. But that's how I learned, you know. It was like thrown in the deep end, learn. Now, you know, now I understand a whole load more of what you need to do and why they don't go. I mean, I went, you know, sometimes I prayed for 4 or 5 hours for some people, and, you know, tried to find out what are the roots of this, that, and the other. You know, now I understand the court system and stuff. It's like we take people who are going to have deliverance, who need deliverance, into the court. And we basically say, okay, we're going to convene this court. The enemy is going to manifest, and he's going to tell you who he is and why he's got a legal right to be there. And then you're going to tell us what he's saying. And then with the authority we now have, because we have an authority over it, then we're going to deal with it. Once you've repented and you've renounced it and you've forgiven, released everyone you needed to do associated with this, now we're going to deal with it. So we still actually minister deliverance to people, but we use other tools now that we've got along the way. And forgiveness is one of the biggest tools that opens people up, because if people are in the torture chamber, as it says in Matthew 18, then they're being tortured by the enemy, and if the enemy's got a legal right to torture them because they're in unforgiveness, you can't cast anything out until they are truly forgiven, operate in forgiveness. And you can try, and if you do manage to get something to go and they're still in unforgiveness, they'll just come back with worse. You know, so I've learned very quickly, you know, I'm not going to deliver anyone who's not truly repentant, because they'll end up worse. You know, and I've seen people get worse by going back to it because they weren't truly repentant, right, and have turned from it. You know, so now you know we have a whole sort of whole toolbox of tools that we use in this process, and as people become mature, they can do it. I mean, you know, I've delivered myself of all sorts of stuff, because once you know how to do it, it's like, and you recognize it, you can deliver yourself. But sometimes God just wants you to be humble and to accept help from others, and sometimes you just need it. You know, I've found I've had a lot of ministry that's dealt with things, but I wasn't necessarily fully healed. And it's very helpful for other people to minister healing into areas of our soul, and to bring restoration to fractured areas. You know, and I found that, because I think, oh yeah, I'm sure I've dealt with all that, but why am I still feeling things? Not necessarily operating in it, but feeling things, but because actually I still need to be healed and made whole and be restored, particularly in emotional areas. You know, our emotions, you know, we need to bind up the brokenhearted. You know, and that means sort of ministering healing into those emotions. You know, so that's really where I would see some of these things in it. It's a process that there are many tools that we use, and help, and having ministry from others is part of that. But those who have many strings to their bow, it's much easier for them to minister, because they can choose the right string to play in any situation rather than just going at it one way. Because I think certain deliverance ministries are very sort of tunnel visioned. Everything is a demon, and you know, and everything isn't a demon, but there are a lot of demonic influences and strongholds and different things that go with it. You know, and you know, some things is generational, things in our bloodline and seed line. Well, you have to deal with the demonic not just in the person, but you have to deal with it in the roots in the generational line. So there's different things that, you know, that we can use. And I think God is just opening up that door. I mean, we've been very eclectic over the years. You know, we've taken revelation for wherever we could get it, and used the revelation we've been given by God ourselves to put together a sort of a toolbox of different ministry things. I mean, my wife's really, really good in those areas. She's excellent in ministering to people, much better than I am. You know, because I don't do much of it now. I'm focused on doing this sort of stuff. You know, and that's where I feel God's called me to. But you know, if I'm called on, then you know I can do it. You know, but I'd sort of a lot of orchestrate the court cases and you know that type of thing to make sure we've prepared the way for whatever else needs to come and take place as a result of that. You know, but yeah.
Yeah. So some of the things I hear you saying, it's like. You know, somebody can be delivered, but if they're not ready to kind of hold their deliverance, more comes back. You know, at the same time, it just seems like even in this process, you know, there's, you know, encountering areas that just seem like strongholds. It's like, and I know and believe that, you know, asking God to reveal that, He can reveal that, but you know, just.
Yep.
Sometimes a stronghold you don't know is a stronghold. Other people can kind of see it or sense it in you, and you can't. I mean, it's just like, what are you talking about? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is that which is the needing other people. And we have a tool that we use in our therapeutic community in rehabilitation, which is called the Jaharis window. And the Jaharis window has revealed self and hidden self, and then blind self, and then when you deal with all those, there's open self. And so when you have a blind self area, unless either God or someone else points it out, you can't see it. You don't see. You either think, well, that's just me, or that's normal, or you don't even realize that there is something that you are operating in because it's blind. You're blind to it. You can't see it. You know, and yes, God can. You can go through that process. You know, we encourage people to do the Jaharis window on their own lives and with others, because you have to be self-revealing. Because there are things that I know about myself that maybe I'm not willing to share with anyone else. Well, if it's in the light, then the enemy's got no hold over it. If it's in darkness, even if I'm not operating in it, or maybe even if it's a past thing that has been historic, but it's in the dark, and I got to ask myself, why wouldn't I be prepared to let someone know that I did this, or this happened to me, or that this occurred? Oh, well, guilt, shame, condemnation, fear, well, all those things are only recipes and breeding grounds for the enemy to use that in my life. So I have to be self-revealing and open with those who I'm in relationship with. I'm not talking about I'm just going to write a blog and tell everyone in the world, because that would be stupid. But in the people I'm intimate with and I have a relationship and accountability with, I am open and revealing. And I'm also, there's areas where I give them permission to speak into my life if they see things which are hidden or blind and I'm not aware of. And therefore then and again, I have to humble myself. And sometimes I find myself defensive. So I'm sure I've not got that. You know, it's like, you know, because often our first reaction is defensive. You know, so we have to learn to listen and to then go take that back to God. So okay, I'm not sure. I don't see that, but I'm gonna pray about it. I'm gonna take it to God. I'm gonna do a court case on it and ask if there's an accusation the enemy has in this area, and then I can then bring that blind self and reveal it, so that then it's in the light, and then I can essentially repent of it, which is change my mind and not walk according to that anymore. My behavior then can change. You know, so you know there is a definite process of this works out, and sometimes God does it in layers. You know, the transformation process is really about layers. He skins us. Once we're dead, in a sense of we've surrendered, he then can skin us. So that's the surface behaviors, coping mechanisms, defense mechanisms, so that he can reveal the thoughts and intentions of our heart, our motivations, the trading and those things, and then so he can get to the bone and marrow and show us, is this a bloodline, seed line, genetic thing as well? And often once you've dealt with the behavior and you've dealt with the motivation and you still still are having struggles, then it's usually because there's a deeper root. But going through the process helps you identify and see it more clearly, so that then you can deal with it. And I've been through all those, and sometimes just dealing with the skin is it. It's just a defense mechanism, and I recognize it, I repent, and I don't do that anymore. But sometimes that defense mechanism is there because of a deeper motivational issue in my heart or a wound, but I need therefore to heal the wound. But a lot of this, I think in the past, a lot of inner healing was separate from kingdom authority.
Yeah.
So what was the purpose of all this healing? Well, and it became almost an end in itself, that people just went on a spiral of more and more ministry, and the enemy just had them going round a merry-go-round, because they never ever used the authority that they should have been coming into to begin to administer the kingdom. So it just became navel-gazing, rather than, hey, I want to be free from these things that are hindering me, so I can begin to rule and manifest the kingdom more effectively through my life, and have greater dimensions of authority in heaven, because the holiness that I'm now walking in, because of the righteousness of who I am, now I be entrusted with greater levels of authority. So the relational aspect of intimacy with God that brings me into an understanding of myself so I can be free, then leads me into who I am in terms of a son of God and kingdom authority. And that bit I think was missing a lot.
Yeah.
And so people then became free, but so I feel better. Well, yeah, great, it's good that you feel better, but now use who you are now and the true identity that you've gleaned to begin to outwork your destiny in it. So, deliverance and all those things, without a connection to destiny, have a habit of just becoming introspective, rather than looking for how does this outwork through my life so that I can bring change and transformation as a gateway of heaven. It's that type of thing. But that whole process is one that we don't have to wait until we are finished to begin to administer the kingdom. It's like, if I'd waited until I'd finished, I wouldn't be doing anything yet, because I'm still not finished. So I have to realize that the level of authority that I can operate, yes, may be in proportion to the holiness that I'm living in, but actually I may have a little portion of it. Well, let's use that then. I can still be on my mountains, and I can still be administering the kingdom in my life to that level. Then that will encourage me to, hey, I want more authority. I want to see greater dimensions of this. Hey, I'm going to get cleaned up even more. So it's a motivation then for, hey, I need more authority. Hey, I need more holiness. So I'm willing to embrace the process, but I don't have to wait until I'm finished. See, I can go through to engage the ark from day one. I didn't have to wait until everything was sorted away along the line. I go through every day. I present myself as a living sacrifice. Okay, God, is there anything today that I need you to deal with so I can rule effectively in what you've called me to do and I'm mandated to do? No. Okay, well, I'm going to go and get a mandate for today and do it. Yes. Okay, well, I'll deal with that. And so when I go and present myself on the altar of incense, or I go and give my heart to the tabernacle of fire and all that stuff, I'm just making myself available. It's not always that God does something. Quite often he doesn't. So I'm available. It's his responsibility to prepare me to serve him. So, at the end of the day, I'm basically saying, you're my head. The government is on my shoulders. Therefore, I'm going to walk according to what I see you doing today, and I can go get a mandate for today. No, I'm not saying that mandate will be what it will be in a year's time or 2 years' time or whatever, but actually it's what I'm called to do today, and therefore I'm going to be equipped to do what I'm called to do today, and then be encouraged to continue the process, so I will be able to grow in that authority and position of power in the kingdom. So, yeah, sort of.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, but it's one of those things that either people don't want the responsibility of government, or people just want the relationship without the government. And you need both. Some people just want to govern and they don't want to come out of a relationship, and that ain't going to work either. So everything has to flow together. My relationship with God brings me into a greater understanding of who I am and my identity and my destiny, and then I can begin to outwork that destiny in heaven and on earth to basically fulfill what it is, to be part of God's eternal purpose, ultimately. And the more I'm faithful and obedient to my calling here, the greater I will be operating in the age to come in what that eternal destiny is. And so it is really, really important to make sure that we're fulfilling the full part of our destiny here, because that will determine where we're going to be operating, in the age to come. So a lot of people are just, well, I'll wait until then. Well, it's not going to work. And a lot of people are also, well, I'm going to do this for God and I'll do that for God and I'll earn my stuff. Actually, no, a reward is given. We don't have to try and earn it. We just have to be faithful. And if our motivation is, well, I'm going to do all this stuff to get a reward, then we're probably doing it for the wrong motive. We do it because we love God. That's our reason. We want to love and serve him because he's the king and creator of the universe. And in doing that and in relationship with him, then I'm free. I want to serve him. I don't have to out of fear or duty. I want to serve him out of intimacy and relationship because I'm his son. A son acts very differently to someone who's employed. And their behavior is different, and their loyalty to the father's different if they're a son as opposed to a paid employee. So in a sense, I have to go from being a paid employee, if you like, my stewardship, and learning how to be a good steward, but then growing into friendship and relationship so I can begin to administer as in sonship. And that's totally different. And the rewards that come are God's pleasure. It's the pleasure of God to reward us. We shouldn't be striving. Therefore, Jesus, I cast out demons in your name, and I prophesied in your name, and I did all this. And it's like, well, why are you doing it? Well, because I want my reward. Or I want you to recognize me, or I want, whatever the negative motives can be in doing things for God rather than doing things with him. Because a lot of people trying to serve God and do things for him rather than in relationship be co-heirs in working with him, and that's a different dimension, because it's coming from our identity with him rather than trying to do things for our identity. And so many people are caught up in their identity is in the works that they do, and that's what Jesus was saying in that instance. You do all these works, but I don't recognize you as a son because you've been operating as a slave, trying to do things, but actually sonship, I don't recognize these things because they weren't part of what you should have done. And so there was a whole dimension there of the works being for something rather than from something. And I think that's the key in a lot of these things. It has to come out of relationship. So there we go. All right. Okay. All right. So we got time for one more.
Very good, Mike. That's awesome. Thank you.
One of you guys.
Well, I was thinking, Mike, when you were talking about all that, kind of to tag in on what we were saying here. One of the discussions we really got into last night was out of Hebrews 7, where it talks about Melchizedek, and where we were dealing with Melchizedek was just exactly what you were saying about how do we allow the priesthood of Melchizedek to come into us in a way that is continually a priest within us. So it's actually the mediator of what we're saying, of what we're doing. I remember in the natural life of court cases, many cases you had to take to mediation before you could even take it to the court system, just to make sure that you had a good case or to make sure that you had whatever you had. So I think trying to understand how Melchizedek wants to work with us as a high priest in us, kind of helps us mediate things in our life.
Mm. Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. And, it's like we are to be after the order of Melchizedek, and Melchizedek was a king and a priest. So he wasn't just able to engage in the priestly sort of connection to creation and to our spheres of life, but actually also rule through them as well. And so there was this dual dimension of priest and king coming together, and and so that ultimately we can manifest the fullness of order, which is also the apostolic and the prophetic as well. So we manifest the full four faces of God in agreement and in relationship. And yes, the more we engage, the more, and this is where I think around the ark is so important, around the ark of his presence, is we can engage there and look into and see from the different perspectives, and then step into, so that we're in them and they're in us, and there's this flowing together in relationship and intimacy and just being led by the Spirit. I mean, it's like those who are led by the Spirit are those who are sons of God. And it's that leading which is what we're looking for, that intimacy of relationship in which the orders of God and how he is in his character and his nature and his ways and all those things are just how we become, and that's really, as you're saying, that order of Melchizedek. It had no genealogy, and that really is where the end result comes, is when we are free from that which hinders us being the full expression of it. But let's keep engaging with the seven spirits of God and being brought to maturity for who we are in our capacity as sons, but there's so much, there's a whole load more I'm sure we're going to have to understand about it. It's pretty cryptic, some of it, Melchizedek, isn't it? But you sort of look at it and think, even his name is pretty weird, and it's just sort of like, okay, what is all this? He's a king and a priest, and he's this, that, and the other, and there's so much, of course, out there which is sort of on the end of the scale, let's say, in terms of some of the things that are being put out there that overcomplicate it in my book. It sort of makes it so complex that you need a PhD in mysticism to understand it. And that I'm much more simple than that, and I want something that works. So getting it to engage in us, being shaped after that, becoming like that, having the face of the lion and speaking out of that face, seeing through the perspective of the lion or the eagle, and then speaking out from that is, for me, what it's really all about. So I'm in it, it's in me, I'm beginning to just live like that, Some of it just seems so complicated that, I would never get it, So simplifying it is, let's engage and let's keep going with it. So, yeah. All right. Okay. All right. Well,